Hi. If you ever experienced or were adjacent to 80s and 90s girlhood in the US, you've probably heard of the Babysitters Club. It's a series of books by Anna Martin and a team of ghostwriters about a group of teen and preteen girls who form a club that matches parents with a young babysitter committed to quality childcare. They also solve mysteries and go on improbable vacations and things like that. The series is such a cultural touchstone with ongoing impact, like new graphic novel adaptations, a hit Netflix series, a documentary on Asian American fashion icon character Claudia Kishi, and a book coming out this summer, We Are the Babysitters Club, with now adult readers reflecting on their relationship with the series. What you might be less familiar with is digital humanities, or DH, an uneasily defined academic subspecialty where people, among other things, apply computational methods to research questions in literature, history, and other fields. Humanities academia in general is very serious. There's really not a cultural equivalent to can it run Doom? Even the word serious is a compliment. There's not a lot of space for fun, and what's worse, copyright makes it impossible to publicly share text corpora of anything after 1924, which is to say anything that most normal people would have ever enjoyed outside of maybe high school English. Also, there's not a lot of university courses on learning how to do computational text analysis on literature. The people who get into it tend to have had some prior experience with computational sciences and CS. So you can probably see where this is going. DH doing computational text analysis has a lot of white guys working on very serious old literature. And many of them are awesome and put together tutorials and try to make the field welcoming, but the resources out there tend to be shaped by that perspective and background. So this is our story about how we set out to create an alternate path in for folks like ourselves who started off more comfortable with the Babysitters Club made-up slang than scikit-learn. So, fall 2019, my husband and I left our three small children in the mostly capable hands of his parents and hopped on a plane to Las Vegas for a week. It was our first vacation in 4 years, and I promised I wouldn't do any work. Since my work is focused on doing DH for non-English literature, I thought to myself, what a great chance to try out working with English for a change. I came across an article about the Babysitters Club with an interview with my friend Shannon Supple, who curates the Anna Martin papers at Smith College, and I realized that's it. That's what I'll do this week. So soon I was enjoying a beer, amassing a corpus of these books, and tweeting about it, and discovered that more than a few of my digital humanist friends were in fact walking encyclopedias of the Babysitters Club. They were interested in exploring computational text analysis too, and so before long, the six of us formed the Datasitters Club. Lee Scalar Bissett, Katya Bowers, Maria Sachko-Sasiri, Anouk Lang, Rubika Rizum, and me. But I also can't forget Mark Algie Hewitt, the director of the Stanford Literary Lab, one of the most famous DH text analysis labs in the world. Just like Logan Bruno, he's our token guy data sitter, but he doesn't take the extra work off our hands. He's our expert bridge to what you can and can't do with computational text analysis. So we started writing these books where we take some DH method or topic and talk in detail about how we applied it to this corpus and why, all written in a very casual, colloquial way designed to be readable for someone with no technical background but an interest in these books. We also write with a lot of exclamation marks, an average of 30 per book. One of the things that we explored was what changes have been made in later editions. Did they actually run with the text from the 80s when they republished the books in the 2000s? We looked at a bunch of different tools, but the most usable was diff mash patch, which showed that there were some changes. Stacy's fluffy blonde perm became a fancy haircut, Janine no longer reached around to the back of the computer to turn it off, and happily, the word thong was replaced with flip-flop. We were ecstatic. We had found a thing. There were emails flying wildly until Maria, who's actually a professor of children's literature and childhood studies, worked up the courage to burst our bubble, pointing out that this happens all the time in children's literature. Seeing these changes might be fun, but it's not actually a new scholarly discovery. And Maria wrote about that in DSC number 3, The Truth About Digital Humanities Collaborations and Textual Variants. What I thought was going to be a guide to text comparison ended up being about something more important. Speaking up when your friends have gone off the rails with something that isn't what it seems. And that's become part of how we write all these books. We write our feelings, frustrations, doubts, and those things get equal space along with the code. We've also been collecting as many translations of the Babysitters Club as we can. The series appeared, at least in part, in around 20 languages in the 90s and 2000s, and the release of the Netflix series has spurred a new wave of translations in the last year. It's been really interesting to look at different translation strategies. By and large, these books are not getting adapted to the local context of their readers. They aren't treated as timeless stories of female friendship that just need some tweaking to be made more familiar for their audiences. Their allure, it seems, is typically as American stories about American girls engaging in American entrepreneurial capitalism in America. We stumbled into looking at the French translations in depth first, and it turned out to be a great choice. The series was translated 3 separate times into French. In Quebec, where they did change the locale, the girls live in a suburb of Montreal and Stacy is from Toronto. In Belgium, where the stories were unusually extremely localized, the girls live in a Paris suburb, and Jessie, originally from the only Black family in Stony Brook, Connecticut, moved from Burkina Faso in the Belgian translation. And later in France, where everything is set in America, just like the original books. But even for books that aren't localized, some concessions often have to be made. The Babysitters Club is littered with American brand names, especially for food. SpaghettiOs, Gatorade, Twinkies. We started to wonder, what did the translators do with it all? So by compiling a list of food words in the text where we had multiple French translations, I wrote some code to run the English text through WordNet, a giant database that classifies English words into certain categories, including foods. That was a start, but it was good that I manually checked some things that were classified as not food, because it turns out that WordNet thinks that the primary meaning of hot dog is daredevil, and hot dog is not a food. Maybe it has a point. I used this data to train a name entity recognition model on food words using Spacy to make it easier to find food words in other texts. Once we identified all the English sentences with food words, we use an algorithm called Blue Align to line up the English text with the translations so that all the sentences that matched one another had the same line number. This made it easier to compare the text and see how different words got adapted. Lee and our Belgian data sitter Isabelle Gribamont took a look at the results and made some surprising discoveries. There were some creative adaptations, like turning SpaghettiOs into ossobuco, a complicated tomato sauce and veal dish, a lot of generalizations, like making M&Ms just chocolate, and at least one explanatory footnote for readers, which you might not have imagined that Gatorade would be the thing that necessitates a footnote in children's literature, but here we are. So in DSC number 6, Voyant's Big Day, Katja used the fun text exploration environment Voyant tools developed by the late Stéphane Sinclair to tackle one of the most memorable quirks of the Babysitters Club. If you've read these books, you might remember that they're marginal or made-up slang, which has to be explained in every book where it occurs. Fresh means cool, and there's also dibble, which is short for incredible, which sometimes occurs as dibbly, so something could be referred to as dibbly fresh. We remembered this language being all over this series, but using some of Voyant's concordance functionality and lining up the books chronologically, there's only a small handful of books where it appeared, and it's most commonly associated with reader anti-favorite Mallory, whose claims that everyone in the club uses this language aren't actually supported. Maybe Mallory is just an unreliable narrator who keeps trying to make fetch happen. Another infamous feature of the Babysitters Club is its repeated use of tropes in Chapter 2, which, in every single book, reliably recaps the basics of who the characters are and what the deal is with the club. We wondered how similar are these Chapter 2s anyways. And if you look at other chapters compared across the books in this heat map based on cosine similarity using word frequencies where darker means more similarity, you can see that Chapter 2s in the big picture are indeed much more similar to one another than other chapters are. We also used some fuzzy text matching code created by Scott Enderle to find 6 grams shared by different Chapter 2s, trying to identify what makes a given pair of Chapter 2s more similar to each other. This gave us a network of the books with a high amount of repetition. We tried color coding the network by which character was the narrator, but that didn't give us a lot of explanatory power. But when we color coded it by ghostwriter, it became really clear that the writers mostly ripped off their own phrasing from other books they had written. So attending Bang Bang Con has been a delight and an inspiration. I don't often get to share what we're doing in the Data Sitters Club with people who so openly embrace joy, whimsy, and a sense of why not with their work. The thought occurs, maybe literature is something like a poorly documented API. It contains wonderful things that you can access with the help of computation, and maybe there's even scholarship that can point the way towards interesting things to explore, like notes from people who've tried to access the API before. What if you treated the books you've loved like data sets that you could explore and appreciate in new ways, even if there's no straightforward way in? If you find something cool or get hopelessly tangled in text, I'd love to hear about it and introduce you to a community of people grappling with the mysteries of literature. Thank you.